Or let me ask you this question.
Oh no.
What do you think? Religion or country first? Come on, Gen Z.
Well, boy, no pressure. But I think it kind of depends on how you ask that. Or there's a few ways to interpret that question, I think.
Okay.
But it made me think of kind of how people vote, at least here in America, in terms of, are you voting as a Christian or are you voting as an American? Because...
Interesting.
Well, I've just noticed because, the only elections I remember are 2016 and on. So keep that in mind, Gen Z here. But
and you couldn't even vote in the 2016,
exactly,
right?
But I remember it. But I do remember each time out of the few that I've seen now, it's a lot of people quote scripture or they talk about their faith.
Oh yeah.
And I just, a lot of times they don't have the best interest of the country in mind, but they're keeping the Christian label, So that's kind of where my mind went, is religion or country first, in terms of, are you voting for the best interest of the country, or are you voting because, hey, somebody said, they quoted the scriptures, that means they're a Christian. But it's anyone can use Google.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's true. Anyone can use Google. But yeah, it's interesting to me because it used to be back in the day, from my perspective,
pre-2016,
way before 2016. It used to be that being a Christian and being an American were very similar terms. I mean, you kind of thought of yourself in that way. You may have voted differently, but you thought of yourself, voting for what's best for the country. Now it seems like it's very segmented and very, just very broken up. And so I've going back in history to the founding of fathers, and that when they built the country, when they were writing all these documents and creating everything, they had a Judeo-Christian ethic in mind in terms of how people should treat each other. And they weren't perfect. I mean, boy, they made all kinds of mistakes because they were people. And politics was just as ugly back then as it is now.
If not even uglier.
Well, they didn't have Twitter or X, and they didn't have all the social media platforms. But boy, they took advantage of the platforms they did have, and they called each other all kinds of names and mega accusations, and
they had tea parties.
Yeah, well, Aaron Burr ended up killing Alexander Hamilton, so in a duel. So it kind of escalated a little bit. So you had all kinds of ugliness. But the thing is that they had a framework of that people should behave and conduct themselves in such a way, and certainly in the judicial arenas, they had a sense of how to make good judgments, right judgments, not based upon sectarianism, but based upon rules of law, and that this is right and this is wrong. Basic ideas of what is right and what is wrong. Those things have seemed to have gone out the window in terms of you got people who can, do all kinds of awful things and get let off on technicality of law, when it's like, what happened to right and wrong? What happened to good and bad? So I think your idea about that, voting voting as a Christian for America is really important. One of the surveys I saw, that 25 million Christians did not vote in the last election, boggles my mind.
That's a lot.
How can you not vote? I mean,
I know quite a few people who didn't.
I mean, and that's just, in my mind, that's irresponsible. As Christians, we have a chance to not only pray for our country, but have a chance to guide and direct who's going to be leading our country. And when we say, I'm not going to vote, that's irresponsible. That's letting down an opportunity to have influence. You may not like all the people who are running, I know I don't.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to make a choice between the lesser of two evils.
Mm-hmm.
I wish it was between the best and the next best, but it's usually the lesser of two evils. And so what I do is I tend to look at the platforms, and we've been talking about that in church on Sundays. I try to look at the Democratic and Republican platforms and which one seems to be the least evil.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, they get fixated on certain personalities, and I get that. But who do you want leading the country?
Mm-hmm. Who can you live with?
Well, who can you live with, and who's not going to screw it up as bad as somebody else?
Mm-hmm.
And again, you got to look at history. What's been the history of the last 20 years or 25 years or whatever, and look at who's been in office more often and who's complaining about the problems that we have and who's done things to solve them. And anyway, this is diverting into a whole different thing. But I think that as Christians, we have an obligation to pray for our country. We have an obligation to vote.
Mm-hmm.
And we have an obligation to do our due diligence to understand who and what we're voting for or voting against, rather than just whatever you read on Twitter or what you read on whatever media platform. Take some time, like you said, Google.
Well,
and you even have to be careful what Google says, because
yeah.
Google has an ideology that it's promoting too.
Mm-hmm.
So don't think it's neutral by any means. But I think it's important for us to vote and to be involved and definitely to pray. If we as Christians believe in the power of prayer, we ought to be praying for our leaders. I mean, the Scripture tells us we should do that.